Sufism, a complete deep dive. The mystical heart of Islam, theology, orders, practices, poetry, and the path to Fana. The beloved is the only reality. The lover, the only motion. Fana, the annihilation of the ego self in union with the divine. Moksha in Arabic dress. Nirvana spoken in Persian verse. Rumi's nay weeping for separation. Hafez drunk on the divine wine. Rabia praying in the dark before anyone knew her name. The most sophisticated science of the heart that any civilization has ever produced. Personal reading series Haligrisity, May 2026 IQ Productions. Contents: Introduction, The Science of the Heart. Part 1, What Sufism Is, Origins, Name, and Essential Character. Part 2, The Theological Foundation, Tawhid at its deepest. Part 3, The Path, Maqamat, and Nawal. Part 4, Fana and Baqa, Annihilation and Subsistence. Part 5, The Silsila, Chain of Transmission and Sacred Lineage. Part 6, The Sheikh Murid Relationship. Part 7, Dika, The Science of Sacred Remembrance. Part 8, Sama and Qawwali, Sacred Listening as Technology. Part 9, The Mevlevi Order and the Sema Ceremony. Part 10, The Qadiri Order, the oldest living Sufi lineage. Part 11, The Naqshbandi Order, the Silent Path. Part 12, The Chishti Order, Music, Love, and South Asia. Part 13, Order, North Africa and the West, the Poet of the Divine Beloved. Part 15, The Masnavi, a line-by-line exploration. Hafez, the Tongue of the Hidden. Rabia al-Adawiyya, the Mother of Sufism. Ibn Arabi, the Greatest Master. Part 19, Al-Halaj, I Am the Truth. Part 90, in full. Part 21, Sufi Cosmology, the Concept of the Perfect Human. Part 23, Sufi Ethics, Adab and the Cultivation of Character. The Dargah, Living Shrines of Sacred Power. As an exoteric dimension, the public face, the law, the doctrine, the institutional structure, and an esoteric dimension, the inner science of transformation, the direct encounter with the sacred, the path that moves beyond theology into lived experience of what theology describes. In Islam, the esoteric dimension has a name, Sufism, and what it has produced in terms of the depth of its psychological insight, the beauty of its poetry, the sophistication of its spiritual technology, and the transformative power of its practices, is among the greatest achievements of any sacred tradition in human history. Sufism is the science of the heart. Not sentiment, not emotion in the ordinary sense, but the heart as the organ of direct divine perception, the faculty through which the practitioner knows the divine not as a concept or a belief, but as the most immediate and most certain reality in their experience. Every practice Sufism developed, Dika, Sama, the Sema, the entire architecture of the master-disciple relationship, is a specific technology for opening that heart-knowing and sustaining it against the mind's constant tendency to replace direct experience with concepts about experience. For Haligrisity, Sufism is not peripheral material. It is the tradition that most completely articulates, practices, and transmits what Haligrisity holds about the feeling dimension of the tetrality, that genuine sacred practice does not begin with thinking, speaking, or doing, but with the heart's direct recognition of the divine, and that all thinking, speaking, and doing that flows from that recognition carries a quality that no amount of intellectual or performative effort can produce. This guide goes deep. What Sufism is: origins, name, and essential character. Sufism emerged within Islam in the 8th and 9th centuries CE as the tradition's mystical dimension, the movement of practitioners who found the juridical and theological approach to Islam insufficient, and sought the direct, personal, experiential encounter with the divine that the Quran's own language points toward. It was not a rejection of Islam. The great Sufi masters were profoundly Islamic, scholars of the Quran and Hadith, faithful in their observance of Islamic law. What distinguished them was the insistence that the outward observance, however necessary, was not sufficient, that the heart must be engaged, transformed, and ultimately dissolved into the divine reality that all of Islam's practices point toward. The name and its origins. The word Sufi names the movement. Early Sufis wore coarse woolen robes as a public renunciation of worldly comfort and a visible identification with the poor. But the deeper etymology that the tradition itself prefers is Safa, purity, the internal quality that the external practice is designed to cultivate, the purification of the heart from everything that obscures its direct perception of the divine. Sufism's essential character in 6 recognitions. 1. The divine is immanent. The Quran says we are closer to him than his jugular vein. For Sufism, this is not a metaphor, it is the precise description of the divine's actual proximity to every human being. The practice is the removal of the veil that prevents perception of what is already, always, immediately present. 2. The heart is the organ of divine perception, not the intellect, not the senses, not the emotions as ordinarily understood, but the heart is the deepest center of human consciousness, capable of direct divine knowing when purified of the ego's obscurations. 3. The path is love. The Sufi path is organized around love for the divine, not love as sentiment, but love as the force that drives the practitioner toward complete union, that makes the ego's dissolution possible, that motivates the sustained effort of transformation. 4. The teacher is essential. The Sufi path cannot be traversed from books or by individual effort alone. A qualified teacher who has traversed the path is necessary to guide the student through the specific stages of transformation. 5. Practice is technology. Sama, the Sema, Halwa. These are not merely devotional expressions. They are specific technologies that produce specific states and stages of development in the practitioner's heart. The goal is Fana, the dissolution of the practitioner's ego sense in the recognition of the divine soul reality, an experience that transforms everything without making the transformed person useless to the world. The theological foundation, Tawheed at its deepest. The Islamic declaration of faith, La ilaha illallah, is at the theological level the statement of monotheism. At the Sufi level, it is the statement of the only possible metaphysical reality. There is ultimately no existence but the divine existence. The practitioner's ordinary sense of being a separate self, a separate, distinct from the divine, is, from the Sufi perspective, the fundamental misperception that all practice is designed to correct. Wadat al-Wujud, unity of being. The doctrine of Wadat al-Wujud, most completely articulated by Ibn Arabi in the 13th century, holds that existence is one, that there is only one being, one reality, one existence, which is the divine. What appears to be a multiplicity of separate beings is the divine self-manifestation through infinite forms. The human being is not separate from the divine. The human being is the divine appearing in the form of a being who does not know it is the divine. Realization is not the acquisition of something new. It is the recognition of what has always already been true. Connection to halagricity. Wadat al-Wujud, the Sufi doctrine that existence is one. That there is only one reality appearing through infinite forms. That the human being is the divine appearing in the form of a being who has forgotten its divine nature is Advaita Vedanta in Arabic. It is the Zen masters before enlightenment. Chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. It is the Gnostic spark of light trapped in matter seeking to remember its origin. It is the haligrig recognition that the practitioner's deepest nature is divine, not metaphorically, not aspirationally, but as the most basic fact of their actual being. Every tradition approaches this recognition from its own angle. Sufism approaches it through the angle of love, the most direct, most human, most unbearable, and most beautiful angle available. The three levels of Tawhid in Sufi understanding. Tawhid of actions, the recognition that all actions in the universe are ultimately the divine's action. Human will operates within and as an expression of the divine will. You did not throw when you threw, but God threw. Tawheed of attributes, the recognition that all attributes, power, knowledge, beauty, love, ultimately belong to the divine. The human being's experiences of these qualities are reflections of the divine's attributes shining through the mirror of the human soul. Tawhid of essence, the highest recognition that there is ultimately only one essence, one existence, one being. The practitioner and the divine are not two things relating to each other. They are one reality in which the appearance of twainess has temporarily arisen. This is the level of Fana, the complete realization of Tawhid at the level of essence. The path Maqamat and Awal. Sufism developed the most detailed cartography of the inner landscape of any tradition, a precise map of the stages and states that constitute the practitioner's journey toward Fana. Different teachers and different orders enumerate these differently, but the core structure is consistent across the tradition. The distinction between Maqamat and Awal. This distinction is one of the most important in all of Sufi psychology. Maqamat are permanent achievements, qualities of character and understanding that the practitioner has fully assimilated through sustained practice and cannot lose. Awal are temporary gifts of divine grace, experiences of clarity, love, beauty, nearness to the divine that arrive without effort and cannot be produced on demand, though the practitioner's Maqam determines what Awal are available to them. The major Maqamat, stations of the path. Tauba, the first station, the turning of the practitioner's heart and attention from the world toward the divine. Not guilt-based repentance in the Western sense, but a complete reorientation of attention and priority. Wara, the careful avoidance of anything that creates distance from the divine, not just the obviously harmful, but the subtly distracting, the merely pleasurable, the habitual. Zud, the loosening of the heart's grip on worldly things, not necessarily physical poverty, but internal non-attachment. The Sufi may own things. What they cannot do is be owned by things. Sabr, the sustained capacity to bear difficulty, frustration, and the long stretches of the path where progress is invisible without losing faith or changing direction. Shukr, the constant awareness that everything, every breath, every moment of consciousness, every flicker of beauty is a divine gift. Gratitude as a pervasive mode of perception rather than an occasional emotion. Khawf and Raja, the twin orientations toward the divine, fear of distance and hope of nearness, held in balance so that neither collapses into despair or presumption. Tawakkul, complete surrender of outcome to the divine, acting from one's best understanding and releasing attachment to result. Rida, the station in which the practitioner's will has become so aligned with the divine will that what the divine wills is genuinely what the practitioner wants. Mahabba, the station of love, not human sentiment but the consuming fire of divine love that the practitioner both receives and becomes. Marifa, the station of direct knowing, not knowledge about the divine, but the divine self-knowledge shining through the purified practitioner. Fana and Baka, annihilation and subsistence in the divine. Fana is the goal of the Sufi path, the experience in which the practitioner's ordinary ego self is extinguished in the direct recognition of the divine soul reality. It is the Arabic name for what Advaita Vedanta calls moksha, what Buddhism calls nirvana, what Taoism describes as the sage's return to the Tao. The recognition, across these traditions, that genuine liberation involves the dissolution of the ego's apparent separateness from the divine is one of the deepest convergences in the Haligricity library. The three levels of Fana. Fana I Afai. The first level, the practitioners sense that their own actions are the primary cause of events dissolves. They perceive everything as the divine's action appearing through various forms, including through their own body. The ego's claim to be the ultimate agent is extinguished. Fana al-Sifat. The second level, the practitioners sense that their personal qualities are their own possessions dissolves. They recognize these as reflections of divine attributes shining through them. The ego's claim to be the source of value dissolves. Fana al-Dat, the deepest level, the practitioner's sense of being a separate self, distinct from the divine, temporarily dissolves entirely. This is the Fana that the great masters describe, the state in which only the divine exists, and the practitioner's separate existence appears as what it always actually was, the divine appearing in a temporary form. The danger of Fana. The great Sufi masters warned that Fana, if not properly guided, can become spiritual inflation, the error of believing that because one has experienced the divine soul reality, one's own personal ego is the divine. Al-Hallaj's famous declaration, Ana al-Haq, led to his execution. The tradition has debated ever since whether this was the genuine expression of Fana, or a dangerous confusion of the personal ego with the divine. Baka? What follows genuine Fana is Baka. The practitioner continues to exist as a person in the world, but now as a transparent vessel for the divine rather than an opaque ego pursuing its own agenda. The realized Sufi is not absent from the world, they are more fully present to it than before, but present as a channel of the divine rather than as a competing ego. Connection to Haligricity. Fana, the dissolution of the ego's sense of separateness from the divine, is the most direct ancient articulation of the Haligric feeling dimension's deepest potential. When the practitioner's feeling is fully open, when the heart is genuinely transparent to the divine's presence rather than filtered through the ego's interpretations and preferences, what is felt is what Sufism calls Fana, the direct recognition that the E who feels and the divine who is felt are not two different things. This is not a destination to be reached through effort. It is a recognition to be received through the specific preparation that Dikka, Sama, the Sema, and the Sheikh's guidance make possible. The silsila chain of transmission and sacred lineage. The silsila is the unbroken lineage of transmission, from teacher to student, that connects every Sufi practitioner back through their order's founding masters to the Prophet Muhammad himself, and through him to the divine source of the tradition. The silsila is not merely organizational genealogy, it is the channel through which the baraka of the tradition flows. Why transmission cannot come from books? The Sufi tradition makes a specific and consistent claim that sets it apart from traditions where sacred texts are the primary vehicle, the most essential element of the Sufi path, the specific states of consciousness that the practices are designed to produce, the stages of Fana, the direct recognition of Tawhid, cannot be transmitted through books or through self-directed practice. They require the direct transmission of an authorized teacher who has themselves traversed these states, because spiritual states are transmitted through spiritual contact, not through information. The Silla of major orders. All silsilas trace through Ali. The silsilas of virtually all major Sufi orders pass through Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, the fourth caliph, and the figure who is simultaneously central to Shia Islam and to Sufi transmission. This connection gives Sufism its deeply esoteric character. The transmission flows through the one closest to the Prophet's innermost teaching. Mevlevi Silsila, Rumi, Chelebi, the subsequent Chelebi sheikhs, contemporary Mevlevi sheikhs. The Mevlevi lineage traces through Rumi's spiritual lineage back through various masters to the Prophet. Qadiri Silsila, Abdul Qadir Jilani, the Qadiri sheikhs across Iraq, Syria, India, West Africa, and globally. The Qadiri is the oldest surviving Sufi order with a clear founding figure. Naqshbandi Silsila, a sil unique among the major orders in that it traces through Abu Bakr, giving the Naqshbandi its distinctive character as the silent order, the transmission happening through the heart rather than through vocal decay. Chishti Silsila, Muinuddin Chishti, Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki, Fariduddin Ganjaka, Nizamuddin Aulia, subsequent Chishti masters, the most important Sufi lineage in the Indian subcontinent. The Sheikh-Murid relationship, the sacred pedagogy of transformation. The relationship between the Sheikh and the Murid is the foundational relationship of Sufi spiritual development. It is more intimate, more comprehensive, and more total than any other teacher-student relationship in any tradition. The Sheikh works not merely with the Murid's intellect, but with their entire psycho-spiritual being, identifying and treating the specific patterns of ego defense and spiritual blockage that prevent the heart from opening to the divine. The Sheikh's function, what they actually do. The Muraqabah, the Sheikh maintains a quality of spiritual attention to the Murid that operates beyond the physical encounters between them. Advanced Sheikhs are described as able to perceive the Murid's inner state, their dreams, their struggles, their spiritual condition, through the connection of the silsila. The Muraqabah is not surveillance, it is the extension of the Sheikh's own spiritual perception to serve the Murid's development. The prescription of practice, rather than giving all Murids the same practice, the Sheikh prescribes specific practices suited to each Murid's specific condition, the specific form of dhikr, the number of repetitions, the specific practices for specific periods, based on the Sheikh's perception of what each Murid needs. The transmission of baraka, the most essential function, the Sheikh transmits the baraka of the tradition directly to the Murid through the initiation ceremony, through physical contact, through the Sheikh's breath, through presence in the Sheikh's company. This transmission cannot be replicated through any other means. The breaking of patterns, the Sheikh's guidance often involves prescribing situations, tasks, or interactions that bring the Murid's specific ego patterns into clear visibility, so that the Murid can see what they could not see while the pattern was operating. This can be uncomfortable, even painful. The tradition consistently describes the path as the most demanding undertaking a human being can choose. The test of the Sheikh, the tradition is explicit that not every person who presents themselves as a Sheikh is a genuine guide. The tests of a genuine Sheikh include the willingness to turn students away if they are not ready, the absence of financial exploitation of disciples, the Sheikh's own clear lineage, the fruits visible in the Sheikh's advanced students. Dhikr, the science of sacred remembrance. Dhikr is the central contemplative technology of virtually all Sufi orders, the repeated vocal or internal recollection of the divine name, or of specific sacred phrases, conducted with specific physical postures, specific breath patterns, and specific concentrations of attention, as a means of purifying the heart and establishing the practitioner's continuous awareness of the divine presence. The Quranic basis. Verily in the dhikr of God do hearts find rest. Remember me, and I will remember you. The Sufi tradition builds its entire dhikr science on these Quranic injunctions, understanding them not as general encouragements to piety, but as specific descriptions of a precise mechanism. The sustained practice of divine remembrance produces specific changes in the heart's condition, and these changes are the mechanism through which the divine draws the practitioner toward Fana. The forms of dhikr, a complete taxonomy. Vocal dhikr, The most accessible form, the practitioner speaks the divine name or sacred phrase aloud, allowing the sound to penetrate the body's own awareness. La ilaha illallah, there is no God but God, the most complete dhikr, the shahada as contemplative practice. The Allah ilaha is the negation, the sweeping away of everything that is not the divine. Il Allah is the affirmation, the assertion of the one reality. In dhikr practice, la ilaha is drawn out on the exhalation, il Allah placed on the inhalation, so that the breath itself becomes the movement of negation and affirmation. Allah, the divine name alone, the most concentrated form, the single syllable that contains all the divine's attributes in undivided unity. Hu, he, the pronoun of the divine, the most intimate dhikr, the form used when the practitioner has moved beyond all names and attributes into the direct presence of the divine essence. In the Naqshbandi tradition, Hu is the primary dhikr of advanced practice, silent dhikr, the internal repetition of the divine name in the heart without moving the lips. The Naqshbandi order specializes in this form, the heart dhikr conducted in the depths of the practitioner's inner life, invisible to the outer world, more intimate and ultimately more powerful than vocal forms. The Hadra, the collective dhikr ceremony, particularly of the Qadiri, Shadili, and other orders. Practitioners stand in a circle, often moving in coordinated patterns, repeating the divine name with increasing intensity through the group's collective energy. The Hadra can produce specific altered states that the tradition recognizes as genuine ahwal. The mechanics of dhikr, the specific value of dhikr, is not in the mechanical repetition of syllables, but in the quality of attention brought to each repetition. Each recurrence of the divine name should carry the practitioner's full heart presence, should land in the heart rather than merely pass through the lips. The sheikh prescribes the specific form, number, and timing. The murid brings the quality of presence. Sama and Qawwali, sacred listening as technology. Sama is the Sufi practice of sacred listening, specifically listening to music, poetry, and song as a path to the divine. It is based on the recognition that the divine can reach the heart through the medium of beautiful sound in a way that bypasses the intellect's defenses and opens the practitioner to divine states that ordinary consciousness resists. The controversy of Sama. Sama has been the most consistently controversial element of Sufi practice within the wider Islamic world. Orthodox Islamic legal schools are divided on whether music is permissible at all. The use of music as a sacred practice within Islam has been condemned by reformist movements throughout Islamic history. The great Sufi masters have consistently defended Sama on theological grounds, that the divine is the source of beauty, that music is the vehicle through which divine beauty reaches the heart, and that the practitioner who listens to sacred music in the right state and with the right intention is engaged in a form of worship as legitimate as any other. The conditions for legitimate Sama. The tradition specifies precise conditions under which Sama is a legitimate sacred practice. The right place, a sacred space, ideally the sheikh's presence or a dedicated gathering space, not a marketplace or social occasion. The right time, a moment of spiritual elevation and spiritual need, not as a habitual entertainment, but as a specific tool for a specific spiritual purpose. The right companions, those who are present should be sincere practitioners, not curious outsiders or those who will treat the session as entertainment. The right music, whose text and melody elevate the heart toward the divine, the great Sufi poetry, the devotional melodies of the specific tradition. Not all music qualifies as Sama. The right state, the practitioner must come to Sama in a state of spiritual readiness, after dhikr, after prayer, in a condition of heart openness rather than distraction or dullness. Wage the state of spiritual ecstasy that genuine Sama can produce, tears, involuntary movement, the sensation of the heart breaking open. This is the sign that the Sama has reached its goal. Qawwali. Qawwali is the specific devotional musical form of the Chishti Sufi order, performed by trained vocalist musicians with harmonium and tabla, building through repetition and intensification of specific sacred texts toward the musical and spiritual peak that can induce waged in the listening community. The late Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan was the greatest qawwal of the 20th century, someone who brought qawwali to global audiences while maintaining its sacred character. His recordings remain the most accessible entry point into the tradition's sonic world. The Mevlevi order and the Sema ceremony, the whirling as sacred technology. The Mevlevi order, founded by the disciples of Jalal ad-Din Rumi in 13th century Konya, Turkey, is the most internationally recognized Sufi order, distinguished by the Sema ceremony, in which the dervishes rotate on their own axes, in a prolonged meditation that simultaneously embodies the structure of the cosmos and produces specific states of consciousness in the practitioner, the theology of the turn. The Mevlevi do not merely spin. The turning is a complete cosmological enactment. Everything turns. The electrons turn around the nucleus. The planets turn around the sun. The galaxies turn. Existence itself is organized around the principle of rotation. The dervish who turns in the sema consciously enters the motion that is already the universe's fundamental structure. The vertical axis, the dervish turns around their own vertical axis, which remains stationary while the body rotates around it. This axis represents the divine reality that is unchanging while all of creation rotates around it. The dervish's stability at the center while the body whirls represents the practitioner's rootedness in the divine while engaging fully with the world. The hands, the right hand is raised, palm upward, receiving divine grace from above. The left hand is turned down, palm toward the earth, transmitting that grace to the world below. The dervish is the channel through which divine grace flows into the world. The white robe that flares outward as the dervish turns, represents the ego's shroud at death. The ego is buried. The flaring white is the ego's release. The black cloak, removed at the ceremony's opening, the cloak represents the tomb. Removing it represents the soul's emergence from the tomb of ego-bound existence into the freedom of the sema. The sema ceremony completes sacred structure. The ceremony opens with a chanted eulogy to the Prophet Muhammad, establishing the sacred lineage that gives the ceremony its authority and acknowledging the chain of transmission. The kudum, the sound of the kettle drum, representing the divine command kun, through which existence came into being. Everything begins with this primal sound, the ne taksim, a solo improvisation on the knee, the most haunting and most central sound of Mevlevi's ceremony. Rumi's Masnavi opens with the knee's cry. The knee weeps because it was cut from the reed bed. The human soul weeps because it was separated from its divine origin. The taksim allows this grief to sound fully before the ceremony moves forward. The Sultan Veldtur, the sheikhs and dervishes circle the hall 3 times, each bow at the sheepskin, marking the sheikh's station, representing a salutation to the divine through the person of the teacher. The 4 salams, the 4 cycles of whirling, each representing a different stage of the spiritual journey. First salam, the human being's birth into consciousness of the divine, the beginning of knowing. Second salam, the rapture of witnessing the divine's power, grandeur, and creative magnificence in creation. Third salam, the rapture of witnessing the divine's absolute unity, the transformation of rapture into surrender. Fourth salam, the return, the soul's return from the divine presence to its station, as the human being serving the divine in the world. The Quran recitation, a reading from the Quran, closes the ceremony, grounding the extraordinary states produced by the sema in the revealed word that gives the tradition its authority. The physical demands, the sema's 4 cycles can last 45 to 60 minutes of continuous rotation. The dervishes must maintain precise posture, precise hand position, and precise spatial awareness while rotating. The physical discipline is inseparable from the spiritual. Watch for, in the later cycles, observe the dervishes' faces. Attention visible on a face that has been turning for 45 minutes while maintaining the precise positions is one of the most remarkable available sites of concentrated sacred practice. The Qadiri order, the oldest living Sufi lineage. The Qadiriya is the oldest continuously active Sufi order, founded by Abdul Qadir Jilani in Baghdad, every Muslim majority country in the world, and into diaspora communities globally. With tens of millions of affiliates, it is likely the largest Sufi order in existence. Abdul Qadir Jilani. Abdul Qadir Jilani was the most celebrated Islamic scholars and Sufi masters of the medieval period, a Hanbali jurist, a preacher who attracted thousands, and a Sufi master whose inner state was described by contemporaries as among the most elevated of his age. His combination of strict legal observance with profound mystical experience made him a bridge between the exoteric and esoteric dimensions of Islam, demonstrating that the deepest mystical realization is not in opposition to the law, but its fulfillment. The Qadiri character and practices, the vocal hadra. The Qadiri order is known for its vocal group Dika, the hadra, in which practitioners stand in a circle, often swaying or moving in coordinated patterns, repeating the divine name with increasing intensity. The hadra builds through its repetition toward states of wajd, the tradition recognizes as genuine divine gifts. The Hizb-i-Ba, one of the most widely used Sufi prayers, the prayer of the sea, attributed to the Shadili master Abu al-Hasan al-Shadili. While not Qadiri in origin, it is widely used in Qadiri circles as an example of the powerful Sufi prayer tradition. Africa, the Qadiri order's spread into West Africa, East Africa, and Central Africa has made it the primary Sufi tradition across much of sub-Saharan Muslim Africa. with particularly significant presence in Senegal, Mali, Niger, Sudan, and Somalia. Kurdistan in the Middle East has deep roots in Kurdistan, in Iraq, Syria, and throughout the Arab world. The Dargah in Baghdad, Abdul Qadir Gilani's tomb in Baghdad, is one of the most visited sacred sites in the Islamic world, drawing pilgrims from across the globe, particularly at the annual Urs. The Naqshbandi order the Silent Path. The Naqshbandiya is among the most intellectually sophisticated and most globally active Sufi orders, distinctive for its emphasis on silent dhikr, its use of the breath as the primary vehicle of practice, and its strong emphasis on strict observance of Islamic law alongside its mystical practices. The Naqshbandi distinctive features. Founded by Bahauddin Naqshband in Bukhara, Central Asia, the name Naqshband means engraver of hearts or pattern maker, referring to the tradition's emphasis on engraving the divine name on the heart through the silent dhikr. The silent dhikr, where most orders practice vocal dhikr, the Naqshbandi primary practice is the silent dhikr of the heart, the internal recollection of the divine name conducted without any external sign. This makes Mandi practice invisible to outside observers and gives it a quality of radical interiority. The Rabita, a distinctive Naqshbandi practice, the murid visualizes the sheikh's face in the heart before beginning dhikr, establishing the spiritual connection through which the sheikh's barakah flows. This practice has been controversial within the broader Islamic world, but is central to Naqshbandi transmission. Wukfi Kalbi, the continuous practice of maintaining awareness of the heart as the seat of the divine presence, a form of contemplative attention that is maintained throughout daily activity, not only during formal dhikr sessions. Political engagement. The Naqshbandi has historically been more politically engaged than most orders, playing significant roles in resistance to Soviet rule in Central Asia and the Caucasus, in Ottoman political culture, and in various national independence movements. Global reach. The Naqshbandi is among the most active orders in Western countries, with significant communities in the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and across Europe. The Chishti order music, love, and South Asia. The Chishtiya is the dominant Sufi order of the Indian subcontinent, responsible more than any other single force for the spread of Islam in South Asia through the extraordinary power of its saints' personality and their radical openness to all who came seeking. The great Chishti Dargahs collectively receive more visitors than any other collection of sacred sites in South Asia. The Chishti character. Founded in Chisht, Afghanistan, the order came to prominence in South Asia through Muinuddin Chishti, who came to India and established the tradition in Ajmer. Radical openness. The Chishti saints specifically welcomed the Hindu population, not by demanding conversion, but by embodying the divine love that transcends religious boundaries. Muinuddin Chishti is said to have declared that the greatest form of worship is to bring relief to the downtrodden, to help the poor, and to serve the needy, regardless of their religious identity. Sama as central practice. More than any other order, the Chishti made Sama and Qawwali central to its spiritual practice, understanding music as the direct path to the states of love and union that are the Chishti's primary orientation. The Langa. Every major Chishti Dargah maintains a Langa that feeds all who come without condition, directly parallel to the Sikh Langa tradition. Nizamuddin Aulia, the most beloved of the Chishti masters, his Dargah in Delhi is among the most visited sacred sites in India. His disciple Amir Khusro was the inventor of Qawwali. He created the specific musical form that would become the primary vehicle of Chishti sacred practice. Rumi, the poet of the divine beloved. Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Balkhi, known in the West as Rumi, is the most widely read poet in the world. His Persian poetry in translation sells more copies annually in the United States than any other poet. This alone would make him significant. What makes him extraordinary is that his poetry is not figuratively spiritual. It is technically precise, theologically sophisticated, and practically instructive sacred literature of the highest order. Every metaphor in Rumi is also a map. The Shams encounter. In November 1244, Rumi, already a respected jurist and theologian with thousands of students in Konya, encountered a wandering dervish named Shams of Tabriz in the marketplace. The encounter was immediate and total. Shams was an antinomian mystic who had spent his life searching for a soul capable of receiving the full intensity of divine presence. When he found Rumi, both men recognized the encounter as the one they had been waiting for. Rumi abandoned his students and his reputation to spend months in continuous conversation with Shams, an encounter that every witness described as nothing less than two mirrors facing each other, each reflecting the divine to the other at increasing intensity. After Shams's disappearance, Rumi's grief became the most extraordinary outpouring of mystical poetry in any language, the Divan-i Shams-i Tabrizi and the Masnavi-i Manavi. The ney, Rumi's central metaphor. The Masnavi opens with what may be the single most important passage in all of Sufi literature. Listen to the ney, how it tells a tale of separation. Since I was cut from the reed bed, men and women have lamented with me. I want a breast torn open with longing, so that I might describe the pain of yearning. Anyone who has stayed far from their homeland seeks again the time of union. The ney is cut from the reed bed, severed from its origin. It weeps, but in its weeping, it makes the music that moves every heart that hears it. The separation that is the wound is also the opening that makes the music possible. Rumi's teaching, the soul's longing for the divine, the ache of separation that every sentient being carries, is not a problem to be solved. It is the primary faculty through which the divine is known. The wound of separation is the instrument of return, the longing is the contact. To feel the ache is to already be in relationship with what you long for. This is the haligric feeling dimension stated with supreme poetic precision. Do not shut down the longing. Do not manage the yearning. Let it sound. The knee's crying is the prayer. The heart's ache is the connection. The Masnavi a deep exploration. Imanavi is Rumi's masterwork. 6 volumes of approximately 25,000 couplets, dictated to his scribe and disciple Hussam Chalabi over the last decade of his life. It is simultaneously a work of sacred poetry, a teaching manual for the Sufi path, a repository of traditional Islamic learning, a collection of stories and parables, and a systematic presentation of the spiritual psychology of the path to Fana. It resists summary because its method is not systematic argument, but demonstration. Every story, every digression, every apparent tangent is doing specific spiritual work. Major themes and their haligric resonance. The lover and the beloved, the organizing metaphor of the entire Masnavi, the human soul as the lover, the divine as the beloved, the entire path as the journey from separation to union. This is not allegory. Rumi insists that the longing he describes is the actual condition of every human being, most of them simply too distracted to feel it clearly. The wise person, the recurring contrast between the person who manages, controls, and optimizes and the person who surrenders. Every human tendency toward ego protection is anatomized in the Masnavi stories with merciless precision and great compassion. The hidden meaning beneath the surface. Rumi consistently teaches that appearances deceive, that what looks like loss is often the necessary prerequisite for gain, that what looks like punishment is often grace, that the divine's way of working is consistently not what the ego expects. This is the training of the feeling dimension, learning to feel the divine's presence in precisely the situations where the ego insists it is absent. The caravan and the guide, the recurring image of the spiritual community as a caravan traveling through dangerous territory, dependent on the guide who knows the route, who must be trusted even when the route is not visible to the travelers. This image articulates the Sufi understanding of why the Sheikh-Murid relationship is not optional but essential. Love transcending religion. Some of the Masnavi's most celebrated passages address the unity of all sincere seekers across religious boundaries. I searched for myself and found only God. I searched for God and found only myself. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. These passages are the Masnavi's direct contribution to haligricity's foundational recognition. Rabia al-Adawiya, the mother of Sufism. Rabia al-Adawiya is the first great female Sufi master, the first theologian in Islamic history to articulate the doctrine of pure love for God as the highest spiritual orientation, and one of the most important figures in the entire history of Islamic spirituality. In a tradition that produced extraordinary men, Rabia's voice stands as the earliest and the most concentrated. The life. Rabia was born into poverty in Basra, was separated from her family in childhood, and spent years in slavery before being freed by her master, who witnessed a light emanating from her during her night prayers. The story is not hagiographic decoration. It establishes the fundamental fact of Rabia's life. Her spiritual development occurred in the most adverse possible material circumstances, and she emerged from those circumstances not merely intact but ablaze. Rabia's theological contribution, pure love. The prayer of pure love, Rabia's most famous contribution, is her statement of the theology of pure love. Love for the divine, not because of the divine's gifts and not because of fear of the divine's punishment, but purely for the divine's own sake, O God. If I worship you out of fear of hell, burn me in hell. If I worship you in hope of paradise, exclude me from paradise. But if I worship you for your own sake, do not deprive me of your eternal beauty. This statement, made in the 8th century CE by a former slave woman in Basra, is one of the most theologically radical statements in the history of any religion. It annihilates the entire economy of reward and punishment that organizes most religious motivation. It says the only valid relationship with the divine is one of pure love, without any agenda beyond the love itself. The two lamps, the story of Rabia running through the streets of Basra with fire in one hand and water in the other. I want to set fire to paradise so that people stop loving God for its sake. And I want to quench the fires of hell so that people stop fearing God for its sake, is the most compressed statement of her theology. Her influence, every Sufi master after Rabia, including Rumi, was shaped by her articulation of pure love as the path's essential character. She is not merely a historical figure, she is the theological mother of the entire love-based approach to Sufism. Ibn Arabi, the greatest master. Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi is the most important and most controversial figure in the history of Sufi thought, called al-Sheikh al-Akbar by those who revere him, and condemned as a heretic by those who find his theology too radical. His output was extraordinary, over 350 works, including the Futuhat al-Makkiyah and the Fusus al-Hikam. Ibn Arabi's key contributions: Wadat I-Wujud, the doctrine that existence is one, that there is only one being, the divine, and that all of creation is the divine's self-manifestation through infinite forms. This is Ibn Arabi's most famous and most controversial contribution. Critics say it amounts to pantheism. Defenders say it is the most precise available statement of the Islamic Shahada's deepest meaning. The divine imagination, Ibn Arabi's concept of the intermediate realm between the purely spiritual and the purely material, the realm of forms, of imagination, of the archetypes through which the divine appears in structured form. This is the realm of sacred dreams, of visions, of the appearances of saints after death, a real ontological level between the formless divine and the physical world. I-Insan, I-Kamil, the concept of the spiritually complete human being who fully actualizes the divine self-knowledge in human form, the mirror in which the divine most completely sees itself. Muhammad is the perfect human par excellence. Every realized saint is a more or less complete manifestation of this archetype. The feminine divine Ibn Arabi's theology places extraordinary emphasis on the divine feminine. His mystical love poetry to a young woman in Mecca is simultaneously erotic and theological, each image of feminine beauty being also an image of the divine's self-manifestation. His treatment of the divine feminine is among the most sophisticated in any tradition. Universality of religions, Ibn Arabi's famous statement, "My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles and a convent for Christian monks, and a temple for idols and the pilgrim's Kaaba, and the tables of the Torah and the book of the Quran. I follow the religion of love," is the Sufi tradition's most complete statement of the universality that halagricity embodies. Al-Hallaj, I am the truth. Mansur al-Hallaj is the most dramatic and most contested figure in Sufi history, the mystic whose declaration, Ana al-Haq, led to his arrest, 11 years of imprisonment, and his public execution in Baghdad on the 26th of March, 922 CE. His death, and the tradition's endless meditation on its meaning, is one of the central events in the Sufi understanding of what Fana actually means and what it costs. What Ana al-Haq means. Ana al-Haq is not, as his accusers claimed, the claim that Hallaj, the individual person, was God. It is the utterance of Fana at the level of essence. In the moment of complete Fana, the individual ego self is extinguished, and what remains is the divine's own self-recognition speaking through the form that was Hallaj. I am the truth is not the ego's claim to divinity, it is the divine's recognition of itself, spoken through the mouth of someone in whom the ego has been completely dissolved. Whether this is genuine mystical statement or spiritual inflation, whether Hallaj was in genuine Fana or dangerously confused, has been debated in the Sufi tradition ever since his death. Hallaj's execution as spiritual teaching. Many Sufi masters have interpreted Hallaj's execution not as a tragedy, but as the completion of his Fana. He died at the hands of the political and religious authorities, forgiving his executioners, asking God to forgive those who were killing him, because if you had shown them what you have shown me, they would not be doing this. In death as in life, he was the lover whose only orientation was toward the beloved. The Sufi tradition sees his death as the highest available demonstration of what the path ultimately requires, the willingness to be completely dissolved, including physically, in the service of the divine reality. The beloved lover theology in full the most complete ancient science of the heart. The beloved-lover relationship is not merely a metaphor in Sufism. It is the most precise available description of the actual dynamic between the human soul and the divine. Develop this metaphor into the most elaborate, most psychologically precise, and most practically useful framework for understanding spiritual development available in any tradition. The dynamics of the beloved-lover relationship. The beloved's paradox. The beloved is simultaneously the most near and the most far. The divine is closer to the practitioner than their jugular vein, and simultaneously apparently beyond all reach. This nautical problem to be resolved, but a lived tension to be sustained and deepened. The tradition maps the lover's development through specific stages, from the gross love of beginners through the refined love of practitioners to the pure love of the realized. Dissolves a layer of ego-motivated spiritual activity. Ishq versus Mahabba, between different qualities of divine love, as the consuming fire that burns everything not divine, as the tender, nurturing love that sustains the practitioner through the path's difficulties. Ishq without Mahabba is destructive. Without Ishq is insufficient. The wine and the frequently used alternative metaphor in Sufi poetry, the divine wine. The intoxication of divine presence, spiritual gathering. Hafez's poetry uses these images with such virtuosity that it can be read either as literal wine poetry or as the deepest spiritual allegory, and the tradition holds that the ambiguity is intentional. Perhaps the most important concept in the beloved-lover theology, the longing for the divine that is simultaneously the pain of separation and the guarantee of connection. You cannot long for what you have no relationship to. The longing itself is the evidence of the relationship. Sustaining and deepening the longing, rather than managing or suppressing it, is the practitioner's fundamental task. Sufi cosmology, the levels of being. Sufi cosmology, developed most fully by Ibn Arabi in the subsequent school of Sufi metaphysics, describes a hierarchical structure of existence in which the divine reality descends through a series of levels of manifestation from the formless infinite to the material world. And the practitioner ascends through those same levels in the return journey toward the divine. The five divine presences, Hahut, the level of the divine essence itself, beyond all attributes, beyond all names, beyond all relations. The Ein Sof of Kabbalistic thought, the Brahman of Advaita, the Tao that cannot be spoken. No practitioner can reach this level. It is the ground from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. Lahut, the level of the divine names and attributes, where the divine knows itself as all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, and through this self-knowledge the archetypes of creation are established. This is the level of the fixed entities in Ibn Arabi's thought, the divine prototypes of every being that will come into existence. Jabarut, the realm of the highest spiritual beings, the divine intellects, the universal principles, the level that corresponds to the Kabbalistic world of Bariah. Malakut, Ibn Arabi's Barzakh, the intermediate world of sacred imagination, forms and archetypes, the realm of visions, dreams, and the appearances of prophets and saints. The level that corresponds to the Kabbalistic world of Yetzirah. Nasut, the physical world, the level of embodied existence, material form, and sensory perception, from which the practitioner begins their ascent. Al-Insan al-Kamil, the perfect human. Al-Insan al-Kamil, the perfect human, the complete human, the universal human, is Ibn Arabi's concept of the spiritually complete human being who fully actualizes the divine's self-knowledge in human form. It is simultaneously an eschatological concept, a cosmological concept, and a practical goal. The perfect human is microcosm. Ibn Arabi's cosmology holds that the human being is the microcosm of the entire cosmos, containing within their own structure all of the divine's attributes and all of the levels of existence. The realization of the perfect human is the actualization of this completeness, the human being becoming the perfect mirror in which the divine sees its own face most completely. Muhammad is the historical exemplar of the perfect human. Every fully realized master is a manifestation of the same archetype at a specific time and place. Implications for practice. The doctrine of Al-Insan al-Kamil transforms the understanding of what the Sufi path is for, not the achievement of a personal spiritual attainment, but the self-dissolution that allows the divine to most fully see itself through this particular human form. The practitioner is not climbing toward the divine is revealing itself through the practitioner's progressive self-surrender. Sufi ethics, adab, and the cultivation of character. Adab is the Sufi ethical framework, the specific cultivation of character qualities that is simultaneously the prerequisite for, the vehicle of, and the fruit of genuine spiritual development. Adab is not etiquette in the social sense. It is the precise calibration of the entire person, thoughts, words, actions, and presence to express the divine qualities that the path is designed to cultivate. The adab of the Sufi path. Adab with the divine, the most fundamental, approaching the divine with the quality of attention, reverence, and openness that the divine's reality deserves. This means bringing one's full presence to prayer, to dhikr, and to every moment of daily life, understanding that the divine is present in every circumstance, and that every circumstance is an opportunity to express the divine qualities. Adab with the sheikh, the specific conduct in the master's presence, and in relation to the master's guidance, complete presence, complete honesty about one's inner state, complete willingness to follow the sheikh's instructions even when they are not immediately comprehensible. Adab with fellow practitioners, the conduct within the spiritual community, serving others, maintaining harmony, supporting others' development rather than competing with them. Adab in the world, the conduct with non-practitioners, with the natural world, with the ordinary circumstances of daily life, treating all of it as the divine self-manifestation, with the quality of attention and care that recognition deserves. Tawadu, the foundational character quality of the path, the genuine recognition that the divine is the only doer, the only knower, and the only source of any quality one might imagine oneself to possess. Arrogance is the primary disease of the spiritual path because it reestablishes the ego precisely at the moment when practice might be dissolving it. The halagricity lends Sufism and the feeling dimension. Sufism's irreplaceable contribution to halagricity is the most fully developed, most systematically organized, and most practically transmissible science of the feeling dimension of the tetrality in any sacred tradition. Every other tradition in the halagricity library addresses the heart, but none has made the heart's direct divine perception the primary faculty of the entire path. Developed specific technologies for opening and sustaining that faculty, produced poetry of such quality that the poetry itself becomes a technology, and transmitted all of this through a living master-disciple lineage that has maintained its integrity across 1,200 years. Dhikr and haligric practice, the Sufi dhikr, the sustained, precise repetition of the divine name with specific attention, specific breath, and specific heart concentration is the most technologically sophisticated ancient parallel to the haligric varescence. Both are practices of supercharging intention through vibration and sound. The varescence uses the full tetrality alignment to invest specific words with transformative power. The dhikr uses the sustained repetition of the divine name itself, the most charged possible sound in the Islamic sacred vocabulary, with the quality of heart attention that makes each repetition land as genuine remembrance rather than mechanical repetition. Both are practices of making sound sacred through the quality of consciousness brought to its production. The beloved lover and the feeling dimension. The Sufi beloved lover theology, the understanding that the longing for the divine is not a problem to be managed, but the primary faculty through which the divine is known, is the most complete ancient articulation of what halagricity holds about the feeling dimension. The practitioner who develops the feeling dimension does not eliminate longing, discomfort, or the ache of what is not yet fully realized. They learn to feel these states with the quality of attention that recognizes them as information, as the heart's perception of the gap between where the practitioner is and where Usher is. The knee's cry is the map, the longing is the compass, connection to halagricity. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other, do not make any sense. Rumi wrote this in the 13th century in a Sufi lodge in Konya, Turkey, in Persian, as part of a teaching on Fana. It is addressed to the divine beloved. It is addressed to every human being who has ever felt the limitation of language in the presence of what is most real. It is addressed specifically to the haligric practitioner who has cultivated the feeling dimension to the point where the heart's direct recognition of the sacred is more immediate than any concept about it. This is where Sufism leads, ground rising. Beshno in nechon shakayat mikonad, azijodaya hakiyat mikonad. Listen to the knee, how it tells a tale of separation, how it recounts the stories of longing. Opening lines of the Masnavi, the ney has been crying since 1244. The dervishes have been turning since 1273. The calls have been turning since the Tharaka moves through the silsila from heart to heart across 800 years. The longing you feel when you read Rumi, that specific quality of recognition, the sense that he is describing something you already knew, is not literary appreciation. It is the heart recognizing its own condition described with perfect precision. That recognition is the beginning of the path, grand rising. Personal reading series Halagricity, or IQ Productions, or May 2026.